I don't know how to say it.
All right, what's going on, gang? It's another video, part 2 of the entire Airtac Customs build series. And you guys already know, I'm not gonna waste any time. Let's just get straight to the nitty gritty because this is gonna be the bread and butter. And today we're gonna be using the newer Gearbox Gen 2 from Airtac Customs and the Mac collaboration, which is gonna be nice because look, you don't really see a lot going on here. And I'm gonna actually show you guys what you can actually do in a little bit here once it's all completed. Of course, we got the combat machine, the G&G body, straight M4. And then of course we have the jack Polestar, very basic, very budget friendly. And you guys already know that this is just something that we're gonna go ahead and tune, and I'll get you guys going with all the FCU settings a little later in the series. Of course, you can't finish that up with the gearbox. Of course, you need a selector plate, so that's all we're gonna be using. And last but not least, we have the very lovable speed trigger that we're definitely going to use and tune the hell out of in this build. So stay tuned, we're going to get through all of that and more on today's build series. So all right, and as you can see here, we already removed the 5 screws. It is very simplistic. This is what I love about this gearbox altogether. It is very different from your standard V2 gearboxes that you see for AEGs or other HPA builds out there on the market. And of course, this is very specific with the Airtac Customs build. So moving along, we are going to go ahead and remove the top here, and you see that there's a lot of grooves and indentations that we're going to use as a guide to kind of, you know, put our wires and everything with the HPA engine and a lot of the other stuff that we're going to use today. So first and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and install the selector plate that we have here. You got to see that there are some grooves and indentations here that kind of will act as your guide for the selector plate. And generally, rule of thumb, because this is made of plastic, you want to be very careful with it. I do kind of just carefully guide it toward the front here, and then just kind of slipping in all the way. It is going to come in at an angle at the back end here, so that's something you want to kind of pay attention to. And then just kind of slide it forward. You're going to want to also make sure that this half circle portion is at the very end, and that's going to be for your selector switch. And then you should hear like a small click. Go ahead and bring it all the way back, and voila, there's your selector plate. And now that the selector plate's already installed, we're gonna go ahead and install the actual Polestar engine, which should be pretty simple. In my hand here, we have the most basic and usable jack Polestar that you've seen. This thing definitely rips if you know how to tune it properly, but a lot of people will have different opinions on it, especially on Reddit. I would just recommend take everything that you hear with regards to advice with a grain of salt. Everyone's got their own preference, and especially with my channel, just don't take everything to heart. You always want to find out what works best for you, and this is just kind of a guide to get you guys started, especially with a budget build such as the jack Polestar. I can't wait for Airtac Customs to come out with, or at least start selling, gate Polestars, because that'll be dope. Even though they did come out earlier this year, there are 2 little indents on each side of the Polestar here. You can kind of see, and these are just going to be little placeholders that the actual gearbox is going to have for you. There's a little bar sticking out, and this is also going to be on the other side of the gearbox. So once it's installed, it's going to keep this engine nice and in place. And I know some people were kind of worried about the top part being missing, but this is what's cool about the Polestar engines. Once it's already screwed in, it's going to be held in place. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of place it there. Setting some stuff aside, we do have the trigger board and the FCU, which is going to come into this original pink packaging here from the actual box from the engine itself. Originally, I had thought that the entire build was not going to have a screw at all because the jack Polestar does not come with one to keep the trigger board down, and that's what you need. But I didn't realize that the Airtac and Mac Customs gearbox actually does come with a screw, which is going to be right there in the very middle, that silver screw right there. That's going to be your best friend to keep that trigger board down. So pay attention to that. Don't lose that once you unscrew it and everything, because that's of course going to keep your trigger board down. So you're going to go ahead and place that down ever so gently, and it's going to fit like butter. As you see there, it's not going to be moving anywhere. And then where you took out your screw is actually where you're going to reinstall it right there to keep the trigger board down. At the very top of the trigger board, I went very gently with the screw. I don't want to go too crazy on it because I don't want to damage the component itself. Otherwise, it's going to act very weird when everything's all said and done. So, of course, be very gentle with it. Now that everything's said and done, we're going to go ahead and apply all the connections from the engine to the FCU cable itself, and we're going to go ahead and rewire them. Polestar does come with a 13-inch long FCU cable. You could definitely buy or purchase a 7-inch FCU cable from Airtac Customs itself. It's honestly very nifty, very easy to use, but for the sake of this build, we're going to go ahead and use the stock cable that we have here. because it's got at least 5 prongs you do want to insert at the side. And then once I do have it guided in, I take some pliers and just kind of grab it at the side. Now that that's installed, we'll go ahead and take the engine itself, and it does, this is a very basic single solenoid connection that you're gonna actually apply. Again, the top prongs are gonna be at the very top, and you're gonna wanna align it at the very end here. The other thing I forgot to install is the actual hose, and this is the most important thing because this is where all the air is gonna go through. I don't even know how I completely missed it. I know it's been a minute, but damn. This is gonna be very simple. All you gotta do is just kind of align it here. And we're gonna go ahead and screw it in like so. It's gonna come in a little weird. It's a little bit extra, so it gives you a little bit of an option to kind of cut wherever you need. So once that's already screwed in, it's already good to go. We can go ahead and go back to installing our actual solenoid cable to the trigger board. And again, you just wanna align the top prongs to the top of the connection here and just kind of guide that along, and you're all good to go. Give it a gentle push. So when everything is actually all said and done, it's gonna end up looking like this a little bit. Last but not least, we are gonna install the purple speed trigger that we have here just to kind of make it nice and clean, and go ahead and we'll close the gearbox shortly after this installation. Now, what I like about these speed triggers is that it really doesn't need much. It doesn't need that little recoil spring or whatever, because the only thing that it does need is this back spring, this back compression spring, so that way you are able to get the best out of your reaction time with your speed trigger here. All you got to do is just use this bar at the very back. Make sure that this lip is actually facing forward, the same direction that your HPA engine is going to face, and that's going to be an easy indicator for you to kind of get everything installed. And it's just going to be very simple, but make sure when you do install it that the compression spring still stays outside of the gearbox. So you might want to kind of compress it just a bit, so that way you're able to guide in your trigger. All right, awesome. And you're gonna want to be very gentle with this because it will kind of bounce out if you're not careful. All right, because I do want to keep the spring and the jack puller star kind of nice and neat in a secured spot, I'm actually gonna go ahead and start guiding the FCU cable and the line itself from the jack already at the very bottom of this gearbox. And what you want to do is just, there is already a groove on which everything is going to nicely sit in. Normally that's where the motor would sit. And once everything's nice and secure, I'm going to go ahead and bring out the top part and kind of gently just place this over what I've currently got. And we'll come back and show you how everything looks. All right, once everything is nice and complete, already installed, closed up or whatever, it's gonna end up looking like this. Of course, like I already mentioned, because we do have a long FCU cable, it's gonna look a little wonky. We will want a 7-inch FCU cable at some point. Now that we have everything together, I'm gonna go ahead and start guiding these screws back in, and I'll see you guys in a bit once this is already screwed in. All right, and so far it's just gonna end up looking like this once everything is completely screwed in. One thing I do wanna know about this gearbox, and that's kind of neat because it does compensate for the lack of support from the top, are these 2 screws at the bottom. I didn't realize that these were actually getting in the way from me actually screwing at the top here. So you do wanna get a hex screw and just kind of adjust it very gently there, so that way it does hold your jack puller star into place. Barely noticeable, and still keeps your engine nice and tight. So good job on Airtac Customs and Mac for that ingenuity there. Honestly, I didn't really pay attention back then, but damn, that's awesome. Next step is gonna be tuning the trigger itself. I always love doing this because I wanna make sure that I have everything that I need before I actually install everything else. I'm gonna set this aside. What I will have with me is the FCU and my trusted McDusty Airtac Customs LiPo that I have with me here. So the first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and connect the FCU, and same thing like the trigger board, you wanna align the top prongs with the top of the other side of the connection there. And then go ahead and install the LiPo there, and it should be all fired up to go. You can see that it says shot, indicating that it is plugged in. So you can kind of see that every time I do pull the trigger, it does say fire. I'm holding it down now, it says fire. All right, we're good to go. So now we can actually fully adjust these settings. So you will need a very small hex screw, and that's purposely gonna be for the adjustment on the trigger there. We're not gonna do any FCU settings just yet. That's gonna be toward the end. I kind of just screw it all the way up until I have a very fine trigger pull where it's not gonna give me a lot of leeway. and I kind of tested out with the FCU. So if it's showing that it's shooting, then I will adjust accordingly. So that's the best way I go about it, and I still get that fine hair tune trigger. And coming back, I'm gonna give it a little bit of a decent hair trigger. It's not gonna be anything too specific or wild, just enough so that way you can see that when I do a trigger pull, it's really nothing at all, at least to, you know, the casual player. But if you wanted something that's really fine and something that's going to be really useful, you might want to switch up the trigger board at some point, maybe to a black leaf or something of that sort. But for now, for the sake of this build and for the tutorial itself, it's just going to be a very decent trigger. So you can kind of see the FCU is giving me the shot. I don't know if you guys can see that there. Every time I do pull it back, there is a shot that is seen right there. And that's all I need, honestly. You can adjust the settings as you go along. You can take it apart or whatever you need to do. Now that I have everything where I need it to be, I'm just gonna go ahead and disconnect the FCU and the LiPo so it's not sitting there and causing a hazard. And then just gonna go ahead and install the body itself. All right, well, it looks like we're almost done with this build, at least for the second part. And so far, so good. You already have the selector plate, the gearbox, and all the components that are gonna be in that. Gearbox itself is already installed. We're gonna go ahead and look at that. We're gonna go ahead and just install this final part of the body, and we're gonna go ahead and get all the components that are already installed in the gearbox, selector plate, pull star, trigger board, and the actual trigger itself. I'm gonna go ahead and slide everything in as so. Normally, if you have a shorter cable, it's gonna be a little bit more easier, but you wanna just kind of guide it at the very bottom over here. So that's where the grip is going to sit. You're going to want to carefully align the trigger going into the trigger space there. One thing I do want to note is that when you do install the gearbox into the M4 body, make sure that your selector switch is set to semi, so that way it is easily adjustable. I just realized, okay, cool. You know, I just realized I didn't get any support for this, so just be sure you have something at home. Honestly, I got a little bit lucky there for a moment. I do have an extra pin here for the very back that's going to help support the gearbox inside the M4 body. And this is also specifically for the Combat Machine M4 body as well. So just make sure that you have something that's actually usable within all these components here. Otherwise, every other part, M4 part, brand, or whatever is going to be a little bit different. So keep that in mind. But first things first. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So now that we got everything already adjusted, your gearbox should be nice and seated there. I'm gonna go ahead and install the mag release and we'll come right back to it. All right, boys, we're almost there. We're at the very end. This is what everything's gonna look like, at least for the body so far. We are gonna finesse everything else, FCU settings, cable management, and all that good stuff at the last part of this series. But other than that, if you guys have any questions or concerns, feel free to follow up with me or Airtac Customs and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And as always, I appreciate you boys for watching, and I will see you guys on the next video.